of July 4th, so congratulations to all of my American friends, saw the release of Spider-Man Far From Home in most territories across the world. At the time of this recording, which is still early days, the movie has so far made a killing at the box office, and seems to have gone down exceedingly well with most audiences. In this review, I will first let you know my general feelings towards Spider-Man the character and the past movies, so you can keep that in mind as I give my overall impression of Far From Home, and what I liked and disliked about it. To this end, there will be some mild spoilers, particularly in reference to the mid- and post-credit scenes and their implications. Finally, I will conclude by giving you my ranking of all the theatrical Spider-Man movies from best to worst. As usual, let's begin by establishing where I'm coming from where Spider-Man is concerned. I've been a fan of the character since childhood, and I've read certainly the majority of Spider-Man stories released up to the mid-90s. I've honestly missed out on the majority of runs and storylines since then, but I do feel I know my Spider-Man nonetheless. I've never been as hyped for any movie in my life as I was for Sam Raimi's original Spider-Man back in 2002. I love Spider-Man 2, and I find Spider-Man 3, as well as Mark Webb's amazing Spider-Man duology, to be soulless and pointless cash grabs. I am of the opinion that Spider-Man must be part of, and can only be done fully justice within the confines of the MCU. But I am not sure I am entirely behind the Iron Man Jr. take on him there, in my own ranking of all Spider-Man movies. Prior to the release of Far From Home, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 still reigns supreme, beating even Spider-Man Homecoming. So, how will Far From Home stack up? Overall, I enjoyed Far From Home, but I do have some major issues with it. Because of these issues, I actually had more fun with Homecoming than I did with this one, despite this movie having more funny moments. While I do love my MCU, and I do think Spider-Man's rightful place is in it, I think Far From Home, if anything, suffers from being an MCU movie first and foremost, and only secondarily a Spider-Man movie. I will get back to that in due course. First, let's dig into what was good. First of all, I like how they handled the blip. That is, the return of everyone snapped away by Thanos in that high school newsreel. It was pretty cool that everyone returned to the same place they disappeared from. Although I do hope it will be explored in far more detail in future MCU movies. I mean, here it was brushed aside like a joke. But what of all the people that were driving on the freeway when they were snapped away? Or that were in a plane? Or on a cruise ship or something? If they were snapped back into the exact same location they disappeared from, without the protective car, plane, or ship being there, then those would be some pretty horrifying returns. Even the return of a deeply missed husband or wife would be a pretty awkward affair for anyone who moved on and started a new family. And 5 years is a lot of time to do that. I'll forgive the more comedic Spider-Man for glossing over that. But I do hope that future movies will address the downsides of the blip. Moving on, I liked the performances, the chemistry between the characters, and the science teacher complaining about there being no science on the science trip, as they live in a new dark age of witches and magic. Also, I liked Mysterio and how he was handled. I've never really wanted to see Mysterio adapted to the big screen, because even in the comics, I thought his powers of literally smoke and mirrors were pretty lame. But to my surprise, they found a way to make it work. One which thematically is the key to unlocking and analyzing the subtext of the movie. Because thematically, this is the most complex Spider-Man movie there has ever been, by far. Where previous Spider-Man movies by and large have had a fairly grounded subtext, with themes highly applicable to daily life and decisions, as well as to life choices and life decisions. This one takes it to a whole different level. Underneath the screen story, there are some bold themes going on. If you look, you will find that Mysterio's outfit and weaponry has a certain brand of iconography baked into it. Furthermore, Iron Man has in this movie taken on the mythic status of a legend. And he is one step away from being worshipped, almost like a deity. Mysterio wants to be the next Iron Man, stepping into that worshipped position, that world-leading position. And manipulation is the tool used to get there. And he isn't the only one using manipulation to get his way. Even the seemingly good guys led by Nick Fury are more than happy to send Parker's classmates into harm's way, time and again, to further their own agenda. Naturally, I also liked J.K. Schillinger reprising his role as J. Jonah Jameson in the mid-credit scene.
Schillinger.
However, this is a very different J. Jonah Jameson. The MCU Daily Bugle is no longer a serious mainstream newspaper, but an online outlet. Although its story seems to be picked up by the established media. In keeping with the movie's subtext though, this incarnation of Jameson seemed to take as much or more inspiration from another controversial individual as it did from Jameson of the comics. But let's move on to the dislikes. One of the things I don't like about Marvel Spider-Man movies are the mixing and mashing of character names and character traits. I mean, this guy right here is Ganke Lee, not Ned Leeds, who would go on to marry Betty Brant and being framed by the Hobgoblin. And just so we are clear on that, the real Hobgoblin was always Roderick Kingsley from the moment Roger Stern created the character. So why can't they just call him Ganke Lee? He clearly is. Also, I like Zendaya's character, but why is she called MJ? Well, there actually is a reason for it, and it has to do with the licensing situation between Sony and Marvel. We'll do a deep dive into that in an upcoming video in the very near future. But getting back to what I didn't like, the post-credit scene. This may be my least favorite post-credit scene of all time. I had not read any spoilers in advance, and therefore had no clue what the post-credit scene would be. By all rights, it should be impossible for characters and plot points from Captain Marvel appearing in the final 40 seconds of Spider-Man Far From Home to retroactively ruin the preceding 2 hours of largely enjoyable Spider-Man movie. But lo and behold, they found a way. What the bullshit? Going back to that subtext I was talking about, I do see that adding shape-shifting reptilian aliens to the mix is a nice way of crossing the T's and dotting the I's. But it came at the expense of ruining the relationship between not just Peter Parker and Nick Fury, but between Parker and Mariah Hill as well. Now granted, the Skrulls standing in for Fury and Hill kind of lets them off the hook for being duped by Mysterio in the first place. But it does imply that they allowed the Skrulls to act in their place and even carry out intelligence operations in their name. And that is much worse. I am excited to see where the Spider-Man story will go next. But that Skrull stinger I would have liked to have erased from both the movie and from my mind. But overall then, where does Far From Home rank with the other Spider-Man movies? In my personal opinion, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 still reigns supreme, followed by its predecessor. Almost as good is Spider-Man Homecoming, which is both more and less of a Spider-Man movie at the same time, but a great ride. I know you're going to ask where I'd place the animated Into Spider-Verse, which I actually greatly enjoyed once I eventually got around to seeing it. If I were to include it, this is where it would go. Then comes Far From Home, which, as I said, I had issues with, though not as many as I had with Sony's amazing Spider-Man movies, both of which I find to be poorly put together from a technical point of view, and neither of which I find to be entertaining in the slightest. Of the two though, I actually had more fun with the second one, because it had what is in my opinion the best Spider-Man costume seen on film, a catchy theme for Electro, who otherwise sucked to high heavens, and a great ending, in that I can pretend Garfield Spider-Man died Sopranos style, a fraction of a second after the screen turned black, gored on Mecha Rhino's horn. That's all the closure I needed. And Raimi's Spider-Man 3? Well, that's just plain unwatchable. So, do you disagree on my ranking and my overall impression so far from home? Then tell me why in the comments, or do you largely agree with me? Then hit that like, and share your thoughts in the comments anyway.
Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, why not subscribe and click the bell icon for all the latest content? And be sure to check out our other videos. And if you really like the channel, why not consider supporting us on Patreon? Patreon supporters get all kinds of bonus exclusives, and you can support the channel for as little as $1 a month. You can also check out our sister channel, Midnight's Edge After Dark, for live streams, discussions, and more. Stay tuned because another video is coming right up.